So now I want to talk about some of the things that are classified with the Linnaean system of classification. There are now about 3 domains and roughly 7 kingdoms in the classification. Back in Linnaeus' time, there were no domains and about 2 kingdoms. So the very first group here, the viruses, are uh, not even alive, but we classify them in a different way and we classify them in a different way than we do with the Linnaean system. Viruses are generally classified by what they infect and what kinds of nucleic acid they have inside of them. So they don't get the traditional kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species designations. So there are like simian viruses, and there are insect viruses and plant viruses, and that's because those are the things that they infect. Um, Viruses are non-living, and that's because they don't satisfy all 7 or so of the characteristics of life. In fact, they possess nucleic acid, but most of the other characteristics they don't have. So they don't use energy, they don't eat foodstuffs, they don't respond to their environment. They do change over time. They do have they do contain hereditary information, but they're not made of cells, and they're missing most of the other features. Um, they Viruses can have as a hereditary material either DNA or RNA. All living things use DNA, at least as far as we know, at this point. Viruses, though, can store their hereditary information in either DNA or RNA. And most viruses surround their DNA and RNA with a capsid or a shell or some kind of protective material that's usually made of protein or sometimes lipid, which is a fat. Viruses can only reproduce inside of other living cells. And I don't know of any exceptions to the statement that they all cause disease. They're all parasites. Some famous diseases caused by viruses include AIDS, smallpox, SARS, which is severe acute respiratory syndrome, measles, rabies, mumps, hepatitis, Ebola, influenza, and the common cold, to name only a few. So in the diagram here, you can see that this particular virus diagram shows this goofy polyhedron head. That's the capsid. And inside, there's nucleic acid. In this case, it's DNA. And then this whole tailpiece section here is designed to attach to a bacteria to inject the nucleic acid into the bacteria, to take over the bacteria to make new viruses. Most animal viruses are either spheres or polyhedrons with a either a DNA or RNA inside, protected inside. Retroviruses are kind of weird. They have sticky glycoproteins. Those are proteins that have uh, carbohydrates attached to them to make them especially sticky. And they stick to cells and they inject their essentially their DNA, or in this case, retroviruses almost always use RNA as their hereditary material. This is a famous photograph of Ebola. If this is a transmission electron micrograph, if you are looking at a tissue sample from some organism that has died and you see this, you get really nervous because that means the life form died of Ebola, which is highly contagious. So we could talk for viruses forever and ever, but we have to move on and talk about the next group because this is just a survey. The next group is actually in a domain. It's one of the 3 domains that are currently recognized. The eubacteria are very simple life forms. They're prokaryotes. What that means is they have very simple cell organization. They don't have a lot of cell complexity. They're complex, but not nearly as complex as a human cell. They have normal cell membrane chemistry. That is, they have phospholipids in their cell membranes, which is what we have too in our cell membranes. This group, the eubacteria, includes bacteria, which are mostly harmless, but a few species give the group a famously bad name. They are mainly decomposers, and they are the major recyclers. So when leaves fall to the forest floor, worms eat the leaves, and in the feces of the worms, the leaves decompose, and the carbon that's in the leaves largely returns back to carbon dioxide in the air, largely due to the bacteria that are present in the soil. So there are a few famous parasitic forms, though. Sometimes they grow in clumps or colonies. Many species are solitary. Some just float freely in the ocean or in lakes or streams. Others live on soil particles in the soil, or they grow on the surfaces of rotting logs, or they're on trees, they're on your arms, they're on your fingers, they're in your nose, they're in all feces, always contain eubacteria. Some famous examples of eubacteria that are not harmless are bubonic plague, E. coli, parasitic E. coli, salmonella. Most pneumonias, many food poisonings are caused by eubacteria. Leprosy, tuberculosis, syphilis, gonorrhea. Most meningitis are bacterial, and chlamydia. Um, because these guys are alive, you can actually treat them with antibiotics. Unlike the previous group, viruses, they're not alive, so you can't kill something that's not alive. Antibiotics are worthless against viruses, but antibiotics can be used against bacteria. So this is the typical construction of a bacterial cell. That looks maybe kind of complicated, but it's not. There's a big old long rope of DNA that's not protected. It's just floating inside the cell. And then around that, there are a few tiny little organelles, and there's usually a protein protective capsule. And a lot of times there's a flagella, which is a big long tail that they use to swim with. This is what cholera looked like. Cholera bacteria cause massive diarrhea in the human digestive tract, so a very dangerous bacteria. That moves to the next domain, the archaebacteria. Some biologists in past years have considered both of these bacteria in the same domain, but currently these are so different than the eubacteria that most biologists consider these to be in their own domain, which is a major statement. They do not have normal cell membrane chemistry. Instead of having ester phospholipids, which is what we have and what eubacteria have, they have ether phospholipids, which are highly unusual. We'll talk more about that in biochemistry, but it's a very unusual feature. Um, the archaebacteria are prokaryotic, meaning they have very simple cells. They don't have complex organelles. All of these guys are anaerobic, meaning oxygen generally will kill them. So they live in areas where there's no oxygen, like in your colon, in your feces. They live at the bottoms of lakes or rivers or streams where there's very little oxygen. They live in hot springs where there's almost no oxygen. They live in really warm, salty oceans where there's very low oxygen. So turns out, though, their DNA control systems are kind of like ours. So most biologists consider the archaebacteria more advanced than the eubacteria, um, and are more closely related to the eukarya, which is the next group we're about to talk about. So the archaebacteria, as I leave, just remember that you do have some archaebacteria in your colon. Your colon is a mixture of food, eubacteria, and archaebacteria that are breaking down your food with you. Um, but they're found in extreme environments, hot springs, anaerobic mud, like at the bottom of a pond, mammalian digestive tracts like yours, and extremely salty oceans. Thermus aquaticus is a famous, there it is, a little bit better magnified. It's a famous bacteria from which biologists extracted heat-stable DNA polymerase. Now, we'll talk more about this later, but the enzyme actually can work in very hot temperatures, which is very nifty in the lab. It came from Yellowstone National Park. Thermus aquaticus lives in the hot springs in Yellowstone National Park. This is Morning Glory Pool in Yellowstone National Park. The yellowish outer region and the bluish green inner region is caused by different species of these archaebacteria growing as slime on the rocks. So at any rate, now we'll move to the next group, the eukarya, which is things you're familiar with. The eukarya includes animals, plants, fungi, and the chromista, which are a very unusual type of algae, but we won't talk about them in particular. The eukaryotes have membrane-bound parts within their cells. So all of the plants, all the animals, all the fungi, their cells are very complicated. There are goofy life forms in the eukarya, and there are ordinary life forms in the eukarya. So let's talk about the first group here, the protists. There is no, well, there's a misspelling right there. I'll have to change that. There is no kingdom Protista anymore. Protista has been broken up, and I think I listed it up here in the notes. There's now currently 7 kingdoms. The first 2 are the bacteria and the archaea. And then there's the protozoa and the chromista. This makes up most of the protists. So there really is no longer a kingdom Protista. There's a kingdom protozoa and a kingdom chromista. And then there's a kingdom plantae, a kingdom fungi, and a kingdom animalia. So to scroll back down here now, the kingdom Protista, I don't want to split hairs here, because we're doing a survey. It's no need to get crazy. The protists include 2 forms right now, the protozoa and the chromists. But basically, we're talking algae and protozoa make up Protista. And what is Protista? They are eukaryotic life forms, so they have complex organelles, but they're mainly unicellular. Most of these life forms swim around in the ocean or in ponds and just swim in the water. They're part of the reason why you don't want to drink the water without treating the water, because it can make you very sick. Protozoa are aquatic and marine plankton, they call them. So you've probably heard of the term plankton. They're floating plankton. Anything that's planktonic is floating in the water. And they are the base of the food chain. Tiny fish eat protozoa. Algae are also part of the plankton. They float also in water. And algae are also parts of the aquatic food chains. Slime molds are unusual in that this is a slime mold here. If you've ever seen like yellow, what looks like vomit on mulch in your yard, that's a slime mold. They're actually more closely related to the protozoa and are classified as protozoa as such. They used to be classified as fungi, but not anymore. And that's because the DNA evidence indicates that they're actually more closely related to protozoa. So this is one of the planktonic algae. It's called Microsterias. This is a slime mold, a very unusual protist. And these are famous trypanosomes, nicknamed trips. Trips is a parasite that causes some rather famous worldwide diseases. This one causes African sleeping sickness, which is a fatal disease transmitted by a biting fly called the tsetse fly. So looking at these under a light microscope in a person's bloodstream is a sad sight, because there are some newer treatments, but in the past there have been no treatments. You just get really, over a period of months, you get more and more tired, and eventually you drop into a coma and you don't wake up. So light microscopes allow somebody to at least see what somebody's got in their blood, which is, in this case, these are protists, also known as trips, which are kind of protozoan protists. That brings us to the next group, the fungi, which are really weird. Fungi are more closely related to animals than they are to plants. They are absorptive eukaryotes, and what that means is they grow as a mass of hairs, and they grow into the dead bodies of living things. It could grow into a dead leaf, a dead tree stump, a dead skunk, and they eat up the body, and then they come up to the surface of the body and they release spores that then fall on other dead bodies and decompose them. So that's how they get in the fridge and spoil your cheese. Their body consists of a mass of hairs called hyphae, and that's what these little hairs, individual hairs, are called. And then the whole mass of hyphae together is called a mycelium. So this whole thing together, the whole mass of hairs, is a mycelium. You don't see this. This is actually inside the block of cheese in your fridge that's infected with a fungus. Usually all you see right here, this is producing spores. The actual body of the fungus is down in the soil. You can't see it. This is not a mycelium. This is a spore-producing structure. And as a result, most people are completely misconceive fungi. They think this is the actual fungus. No, the fungus is actually bigger than you are. It could weigh thousands of pounds and grow through the forest floor. It could a mushroom growing in your yard actually probably encompasses your yard and many of your neighbors' yards, and it pops up mushroom caps wherever it wants to release spores. So they are major decomposers, and they're major recyclers. There are a few species that are very economically valuable, like morels and truffles are grown for food, and yeast ferment all of our alcoholic beverages. Yeast are weird fungi in that they're unicellular. Most fungi are multicellular, but yeast are weird in that they're unicellular. And so in this group, we have mushrooms and toadstools and athlete's foot fungus and ringworm, bracket fungi, morels, puffballs, and many more. So chanterelles and all kinds of different things are in this group. Weird. but part of the tree of life. So that it concludes the non-animal and non-plant life forms on planet Earth.